In the suffocating heat of a New Guinea jungle in 1944, American soldiers stumbled upon something that would change the course of World War II in ways nobody could have predicted. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't intelligence. It was a sound. A faint, pathetic whimper coming from an abandoned foxhole. When Private E.J. Moore peered inside, he found a creature so small, so broken, that most men would have walked away. A 4-pound skeleton wrapped in matted golden fur, ribs protruding like piano keys, eyes that had seen starvation and abandonment, the kind of eyes that make you look away because they hold too much pain. Nobody knows how she got there. Nobody knows who left her. Nobody wanted her. Here's what gets me. This tiny, forgotten creature that soldiers passed by for days, that had been discarded like garbage in one of the most brutal theaters of war, would go on to save over 250 lives. She would crawl through a pipe so narrow that grown men couldn't fit a fist through it. She would survive 150 air raids. She would visit wounded soldiers who doctors had given up on, and somehow bring them back. But before any of that happened, she had to survive the next 24 hours. Because in the Pacific jungle, a starving 4-pound dog doesn't last long. The snakes, the heat, the diseases that killed soldiers within days. She should have died in that foxhole. She almost did. Nobody's coming. That's what her eyes seemed to say when they found her. The foxhole was narrow, maybe 2 feet deep, dug into mud that smelled like rot and death. Japanese soldiers had likely dug it months before. Now it served as a grave for a creature that weighed less than a combat boot. She didn't bark when they approached. She didn't move. She just waited. The soldiers who first spotted her kept walking. Too small, too weak, too much trouble. War doesn't pause for strays. War doesn't have room for charity cases. For 3 days, she sat there. No food, no water, just the oppressive humidity and the distant thunder of artillery. The jungle at night becomes a symphony of predators. Snakes thick as arms, rats the size of cats. Every shadow carries teeth. Yet somehow, that 4-pound bundle of bones survived 3 nights alone. Maybe she was already something more than ordinary. Maybe she was just too stubborn to die. The old soldiers used to say something strange about that jungle. They said the island chose who lived and who died. Malaria took the strongest men without warning. Dysentery turned warriors into corpses. But occasionally, rarely, the jungle would spare something small, something that didn't make sense. The chaplain noticed her first. That dog shouldn't be alive, he told Corporal William Wynn. Nothing that small survives out here. Nothing. Wynn laughed it off. But later that week, a mortar round landed exactly where Wynn's unit had been standing, 30 seconds after they'd moved positions, because the little dog started barking frantically at nothing. Coincidence, they said. Then it happened again. And again. The soldiers started watching her more carefully. Something was different about this dog. Something none of them could explain yet. Something that would soon become legendary. If you're new here, we tell stories that history tried to forget. Stories about underdogs who changed everything. Smash that subscribe button so you never miss one. William Wynn didn't plan to keep her. When his buddy found the dog and brought her back to camp, Wynn thought she'd be gone by morning. Traded for cigarettes, maybe. Given to some rear echelon officer looking for a mascot. But something happened that first night. The dog, this tiny, trembling thing, crawled onto Wynn's chest while he slept. He woke up at 3 a.m. to find her pressed against his heart, her whole body rising and falling with his breath. In the middle of a war zone, surrounded by death and chaos, this creature had chosen him. He paid his buddy $6.44 in Australian currency. The other soldiers laughed. "You paid $6 for a rat," one of them joked. "She'll be dead in a week," another said. "What are you gonna do? Carry her in your pocket?" Yes, that's exactly what he did. Wynn fashioned a small bag that hung around his neck. The dog, barely bigger than his hand, rode there against his chest. She ate from his rations. She drank from his canteen. She slept in his helmet. And from that moment forward, their fates were sealed. If Wynn lived, she lived. If he died, she died. There was no going back. He named her Smoky, for the grayish tint that colored her golden fur in certain lights. Little did he know he'd just purchased the most decorated war dog in American history for less than the price of a pack of cigarettes. She was a Yorkshire Terrier, for pounds, 7 inches tall, a breed designed for English parlors and fancy tea rooms, not the blood-soaked jungles of the Pacific. But Smoky didn't know she was supposed to be delicate. Nobody told her she was bred to sit in laps and look pretty. And frankly, she wouldn't have listened anyway. Within weeks, she'd learned a dozen commands. Within months, she knew over 100. She learned to walk a tightrope stretched between soldiers' hands. She learned to spell her own name by picking out letters. She learned to play dead when someone pointed a finger gun at her. The troops couldn't believe it. Here was this scrap of fluff, this throwaway creature, performing tricks that made grown men who'd watched their friends die in combat, laugh until they cried. The Army officially recognized her as a mascot in the Southwest Pacific area. She was assigned to the 5th Air Force. She participated in 12 combat missions. She survived 150 air raids. She lived through a typhoon at Okinawa. But here's what set Smoky apart from every other mascot in the war. She didn't just watch. She worked. When the men went on patrol, she went with them. When planes took off for bombing runs, she was in the cockpit. When wounded soldiers needed comfort in field hospitals, she was there, curled up on their chests, just like she'd done with Wynn that first night. She wasn't a pet. She wasn't a mascot. She was a soldier. And she was about to prove it in a way that would save hundreds of lives. Lingayen Gulf, January 1945. The Air Force had a problem, a big one. A critical airfield needed communication cables run beneath the taxiway. Without those cables, planes couldn't coordinate properly. Without coordination, men would die. The solution seemed simple: dig a trench under the runway. But there was a catch. Digging that trench would take 3 days. 3 days meant the airfield would be out of commission. 3 days meant 40 aircraft would be grounded. 3 days meant 250 ground crew members would be exposed to enemy air raids without the ability to scramble fighters for protection. 3 days meant death. The engineers proposed an alternative: run the wire through an existing drainage pipe that went under the runway. Great idea. One problem: the pipe was only 8 inches in diameter, and it was 70 feet long, filled with decades of dirt, debris, and God knows what else. Nobody's fitting through that pipe, the commander said. We'll have to dig. Then someone looked at Wynn. Then they looked at Smoky. No. Wynn said immediately, just hear me out. Absolutely not. But the numbers didn't lie. 3 days of exposure meant potential casualties. The pipe offered a solution. If someone small enough could run a string through it first, they could use that string to pull the telegraph wire. Wynn spent that night awake, staring at his dog. She'd followed him into combat zones. She'd survived air raids. She'd brought joy to hundreds of soldiers. And now they wanted her to crawl through 70 feet of pitch-black pipe. A pipe she might get stuck in, might suffocate in, might never come out of. He could say no. He had every right to say no. But 250 men would be exposed for 3 days. And this 4-pound dog had already proven she was braver than any of them. At dawn, Wynn made his decision. He tied the string to her collar. He placed her at the entrance of the pipe. He walked to the other side, 70 feet away, where the pipe opened up. She couldn't see him. She couldn't hear him. She could only smell the direction he'd gone. Come, Smoky, he called. Silence. Come on, girl. Nothing. Inside that pipe, it was absolute darkness. Cobwebs, debris, the kind of blackness that makes you forget which way is up. For a 4-pound dog, it might as well have been a mine shaft. Smoky, come. And then movement. A scratching sound. Getting closer. Closer. The string started moving. Wynn watched it inch forward, foot by painful foot. 1 minute. 2 minutes. 2.5. Then, exploding from the pipe like a golden bullet, Smoky launched herself into Wynn's arms, covered in dirt, trembling but alive. Behind her, the string stretched the entire 70 feet. The men erupted in cheers. The cable was pulled through in minutes. The airfield never shut down. 250 men never had to face those exposed 3 days. A 4-pound dog had just completed a mission that saved hundreds of lives. Stories like Smoky's remind me why I do this channel. The forgotten heroes who never got their spotlight. If this hits you the same way, drop a comment and let me know. The pipe was just the beginning. After word spread about what Smoky had done at Lingayen Gulf, she became something more than a mascot. She became a symbol. The Army brought her to field hospitals, not as a visitor, but as a healer. Doctors had noticed something strange. Soldiers who'd been unresponsive for days would suddenly stir when Smoky was placed on their beds. Men who hadn't spoken since their injuries would murmur her name. Something about her presence, her warmth, her heartbeat, her unconditional acceptance reached places that medicine couldn't. Smoky became one of the first therapy dogs in recorded history. But the war wasn't done with her yet. Okinawa, 1945. The battle for Okinawa was one of the bloodiest of the Pacific War. 12,000 Americans died. Typhoons ripped through the island with 140-mile-per-hour winds. Japanese kamikaze pilots dove their planes into ships with religious fervor. And through all of it, Smoky stayed. One night, a typhoon hit the camp with such ferocity that tents became missiles. Debris flew through the air like shrapnel. Soldiers huddled in trenches, praying the storm would pass. One couldn't find Smoky. For 3 hours, in the middle of that typhoon, he searched. Rain so heavy he couldn't see his own hands. Wind that knocked him off his feet. Other soldiers told him to give up. She was 4 pounds. The storm would have carried her miles away. He didn't stop. At 4 a.m., in the eye of the storm, he found her. She'd wedged herself beneath a fallen supply crate, shaking but alive. When she saw Win, she didn't bark. She just crawled out and pressed herself against his chest, exactly like she'd done that first night in the jungle. They survived the rest of the typhoon together. But the war had one more test. Japanese snipers had been targeting officers at the Okinawa base. 3 had been killed in the previous week, picked off while walking between buildings. The camp was on edge. Everyone expected to be next. Smoky started acting strange. She would refuse to walk certain paths. She'd plant her feet and bark at seemingly empty spaces. The soldiers thought she was going crazy from the stress. Then Private Henderson ignored her. "She's just a dog," he said, stepping past her onto a path she'd been blocking. The shot came from nowhere. Henderson went down, shoulder wound, non-fatal. The sniper had missed his kill shot by inches. But here's the thing. Henderson was the 4th person Smoky had tried to stop that day. The first 3 had listened. They'd taken different routes. They were alive. The sniper was found that afternoon. Positioned exactly where the path Smoky had blocked would have been the perfect kill zone. She couldn't have known. She shouldn't have known. But she did. After that, nobody questioned Smoky's instincts again. By the end of the war, she'd flown 12 combat missions, riding in a specially designed oxygen mask because the planes flew too high for her tiny lungs. She'd survived 150 air raids on 8 different islands. She'd visited countless hospitals and brought soldiers back from the brink. But war changes everyone. When Win finally received his orders to return home, he faced a new problem. Military regulations prohibited bringing animals back from overseas. After everything she'd done, after every life she'd saved, they wanted to leave her behind. Win looked at the regulations. Then he looked at his dog. Then he made a decision that could have ended his military career. "I'm not going home without her," he told his commanding officer. "Court-martial me if you have to." The officer stared at Win for a long time. This wasn't some regular soldier making a fuss about a pet. This was the man who'd been with Smoky through everything. The bombing runs, the typhoon, the pipe, the hospitals. The Army had let him bring her on combat missions. They'd used her as a therapy dog. They paraded her as a morale booster. And now they wanted to abandon her on a foreign island? The officer looked away first. "I didn't see any dog," he said quietly. "And I won't see one on that transport plane either." Win smuggled Smoky home inside a modified gas mask carrier. When the plane landed in America, Smoky had logged more combat flight hours than most pilots. She'd served in the South Pacific for 2 years straight. She weighed exactly 4 pounds, the same as the day Win had found her in that foxhole. But coming home wasn't a celebration. America in 1945 didn't know what to do with war dogs. There were no parades for them, no ceremonies. Soldiers came back to ticker tape and kissing nurses. Dogs came back to nothing. Wynn refused to accept that. He'd seen what Smoky could do. He'd watched her save lives, not through violence, but through presence, through love, through an inexplicable connection to human suffering. He made a choice that would define the rest of their lives. Instead of retiring her to a backyard somewhere, he took her on tour. Veterans hospitals, television shows, live demonstrations. For the next 12 years, Smoky performed hundreds of shows, visiting thousands of wounded soldiers and sick children. She became the template for what therapy dogs could be. The medical community took notice. Dr. Charles Mayo, yes, that Mayo, from the Mayo Clinic, personally credited Smoky with pioneering the concept of animal-assisted therapy. She appeared on television over 42 times. She performed her act in Cleveland for a decade. She became more famous after the war than during it. And through it all, she never forgot her training. At 12 years old, she could still walk a tightrope. At 13, she could still spell her name. At 14, she could still play dead when Wynn pointed his finger. She'd gone from a starving stray in a foxhole to the most famous dog in American history. But like all soldiers, she was running out of time. Smoky passed away on February 21st, 1957. She was 14 years old, ancient for a Yorkshire Terrier, ancient for any dog, but especially ancient for one who'd survived combat, typhoons, and 2 years in the deadliest theater of World War II. Wynn buried her in a .30 caliber ammunition box. It's the same kind of box soldiers used to store bullets, the tools of war. But this box held something different, something that had proven war could be survived with love instead of violence. He buried her in Cleveland Metroparks, in a quiet corner where sunlight filters through the trees. The grave was unmarked for years. Then, in 2005, a bronze statue was erected above her burial site. It shows Smoky sitting in a soldier's helmet, the same way she'd slept beside Wynn every night in the Pacific. Veterans from across the country make pilgrimages to her grave now. They leave flowers. They leave dog treats. They leave medals. They leave handwritten notes thanking a dog they never met for showing them what courage looks like. But Smoky's legacy wasn't just memory. She changed how the world viewed therapy animals. Before Smoky, dogs in hospitals were considered unsanitary distractions. After Smoky, they became healing tools. Today, therapy dogs visit veterans' hospitals, children's wards, disaster zones, and hospices, all tracing their lineage back to one tiny Yorkshire Terrier who crawled through a pipe in the Philippines. The Smoky War Dog Memorial now stands as the first of its kind in America, a national monument to war dogs. Her story has been told in books, documentaries, and now here. But the most remarkable part of her legacy isn't what she did. It's who she was when nobody was watching. Veterans who knew her said she never changed. Whether she was performing for television cameras or sitting alone with Wynn in their Cleveland home, she was the same dog, the same steady presence, the same warmth against a soldier's chest. She didn't perform for applause. She performed because that's who she was. A 4-pound dog who'd been left to die in a foxhole and decided the world was worth fighting for anyway. Today, Smoky's breed, Yorkshire Terriers, remains one of the most popular in America. Most people buy them for companionship, for their silky coats, for their portable size. But every now and then, someone looks at their tiny Yorkshire Terrier and wonders if that same fire burns inside, that same inexplicable courage, that same stubborn refusal to accept limitations. Veterans hospitals across the country now employ thousands of therapy dogs. Each one traces their lineage, conceptually, spiritually, back to a 4-pound stray who crawled through 70 feet of darkness because one man believed in her. William Wynn passed away in 2021 at the age of 99. He spent the final decades of his life honoring Smoky's memory, writing her biography, caring for her memorial, sharing her story with anyone who would listen. He said something once that I can't stop thinking about. She was never mine. She belonged to every soldier who ever needed hope. I just got to carry her. In a war that killed millions, one of the greatest heroes weighed 4 pounds and never fired a shot. She saved 250 men with a string. She brought dying soldiers back with a heartbeat. She showed an entire generation that love is its own kind of weapon. And she did it all from a foxhole nobody thought was worth checking. That's not just history. That's a reminder. Here's what keeps me up at night about Smoky's story. She was abandoned. Someone, we'll never know who, left a 4-pound dog in a foxhole in the middle of a jungle war zone. They walked away. They didn't look back. They condemned her to die. And she should have. The statistics, the logic, the sheer mathematical cruelty of war, all of it pointed to one outcome. A nameless death in a nameless hole. But she didn't die. Because one soldier stopped when others walked by. One soldier paid $6 when others laughed. One soldier believed she was worth saving when the world said she wasn't. I think about that a lot. How many potential heroes are we walking past every day? How many lost causes are waiting for someone to see them? How many Smokies are sitting in foxholes right now, hoping someone will stop? War shows us the worst of humanity. But sometimes, rarely, it shows us the best. A creature who had every reason to give up chose to keep living. A soldier who had every excuse to ignore her chose to stop. Together, they proved that the smallest partnerships can change history. Smoky never asked to be a hero. She just wanted to be loved. And maybe that's the most heroic thing of all. If this story stayed with you, there's a subscribe button waiting. We tell the forgotten stories, the ones history almost buried. Smoky waited 80 years for the world to remember her. The next story might be waiting for you. See you there.